Galen, you have very strong views about the nature of consciousness, and as a panpsychist, that consciousness is part of the fundamental nature of real physicalism, which is of your arguments and a strong conclusion. I want to try to roll that back to the beginning, because as you comment the world, what are the observations or data points or information that you are using in order to analyze what it is and be able to make your arguments? So looking at what are the relevant things about the world that you need to begin to structure your concept of consciousness?
I think all I need to do is to be a human being having conscious experience. This relates to my objection to the idea that there's a so-called mystery of consciousness. My reply to that is, no, I know exactly what consciousness is. There is no mystery at all. I not only know what the human, as it were, form or flavor of consciousness is, I also have a completely general conception of what it is. And I think I can illustrate that by think about young children when they listen to a story. They are able, and you tell them about some alien creatures or some magical creatures who have experiences that they can't even imagine. They get that immediately. And what that shows is that they too already at a young age have a completely general conception of what consciousness is. So I don't think I have to do any more theoretical work to say what I mean by consciousness. And I'm going to say the thing that Ned Block made famous when he quoted Louis Armstrong, when Louis Armstrong was asked what jazz was. Louis Armstrong said, if you got to ask, you ain't never going to know. And this is exactly what I would say to someone who said, what is consciousness? You know what it is from your own case. The having is the knowing.
Okay, and beginning the arguments against that would be things that we can prove that your consciousness misfires on. Optical illusions, blind spots.
No problem.
Those are things that you get wrong. Our vision, we integrate everything in our minds, but when you see a movie, it looks like it flows together, but it's really 30, 40, whatever, 30 frames a second. 24 and optical illusions, things that we just get wrong. I have a particular example that I use, and that is I have keratoconus in one eye, very severe, and so it's legally blind. If in my good eye, if I see a light bulb, I see a light bulb, and it's right where it should be. If I close my left eye and I only have my right eye, like right now, I will see 100 light bulbs skewed to the right, and they're all smeared together. Now, if and I could have had both eyes that way, which was terrible. But if that's all I saw, that would be that would be my impression of the way the world works. And so, who's to say which is right?
But I would just say you're still having conscious experience. It's getting it wrong in some ways, but I don't think that is any kind of objection. I mean, you can relate this to the fact that, as I would say, color isn't out there. Color is not out there in the world. That's just the way things appear to us because of the light reflectance properties of that surfaces have, given their micromolecular structure. We don't get the world right in many ways, but all that matters is that there's something, famous phrase, made famous by Tom Nagel, there's something it's like for you when you do that.
Yes.
And that's the stuff I'm talking about. And the fact that you're getting things wrong or that there's blind spot doesn't touch that.
Okay. How about correlations between neurological activity and, particularly in the visual system where it's been studied most of all, that you see these very, very tight correlations between, some cells will fire when there are only edges, and some cells will fire when there's a mirror image. There's very specific relations between neurological firing in certain geometries and certain frequencies with conscious experiences. I mean, that's a relevant data point.
Yeah, but no, I see no problem there. So evolution came along and it worked. It worked matter up into such a way that it was useful for creatures that move around on their own. So I don't know the details of how it did it, but I do know that it did do it. And I do know that neuroscience is telling us a lot about how it did it. But I don't see a difficulty for my view. And I don't think, whatever the truth about that, in the sort of super neuroscience of the world, that's not going to change my concept of what consciousness is, which is already complete. And no mystery. I know exactly what it is.
Yeah, but if you can have this very tight correlation between what you know what consciousness is and activity in your brain, does not that give you pause to think that one is the cause of the other?
No, it doesn't.
Why?
It's just that that's how evolution spun up matter in the.
But why did it have to do that if consciousness was fundamental in the beginning?
Because it was kind of boring. I mean, as it were, primordial consciousness, I imagine, is a kind of, nothing interesting. It's just, once you get self-moving organisms, it turns out to be very useful for them to react to their environment.
So the argument,
standard story.
The argument against that would be is that you are generalizing some kind of consciousness when really all it is are these specific activities that you're seeing a generalization called consciousness that sits there that you don't really need, as long as you have these specific kinds of relationships between.
Well, I'm just going to take that from you and turn it around, because I don't really need it. So why do I have it? Why do I have all this glorious Technicolor stuff? Because that was the very material out of which all this was made. When we say, look, it's neurons firing, we sort of get this intuitive reaction. Oh, wow, that can't be this stuff. But it literally just is this stuff. That would be my position.
And that's a very interesting position. It's very close to what a material. I was going to say a real materialist, but that would make you angry. So I'm not going to say that. No. So what a materialist in today's world would say, but you're then imposing that there's some consciousness there. But if you have this absolute correlation between the physical and the mental, then maybe a radical identity theory is correct. It's an
identity. It's more than the correlation. There's a very beautiful book by Henry Marsh, the neurosurgeon, called Do No Harm. I don't know if you've read it.
No.
But he'd say that sometimes when he's operating, it's going he's a bit tired, he needs to take a rest. He looks at this lump of fatty protein and he thinks, how is it possible that this should just be the consciousness? And then he just says, he just bites the bullet, as he should. It just is. It's just, we've got this deep prejudices of thought that make us think, how could this stuff be that? But really, when we look at the fatty proteinous stuff, the soggy grey matter, that's just an appearance. And that is what I like to call the neo-Kantian point, that what we see when we look at the world is just an appearance of something whose ultimate intrinsic nature, once again, we do not know. This is not only true when we do physics, but also in everyday life. I mean, after all, as you probably also know, there are a number of leading theoretical physicists who say that space-time is not fundamental.
Sure.
So you think you see this spatial thing, but you're getting something radically wrong, so radically wrong that you have no right, as it were, to think that this stuff, which you think of as spatial, couldn't just be consciousness.